Chapter 9, Orpheus and Eurydice. Tonks stared down at the report she was writing, looking but not seeing. She was bored, as she always was when she wasn't on a mission. Giving up on the illusion of actually paying attention, Tonks leant back heavily in her chair, spinning her wand idly in her fingers. This was the worst part of being an Auror, the parts in between the action. As it had for the last week or so now, her mind once more wandered to Harrison, or more specifically one night with him in particular. It had been a good night, among the better dates she had been on even if it wasn't the best, not quite up there with the one she had gone on with Charlie when he had let her ride a dragon. They had talked, and she had learned about him, and he learned about her in return. Family, hobbies, their jobs, tastes in the opposite sex, they had talked about it all. She had found it easy to talk to him, helped by the constant stream of drinks they had consumed. And then they had left, and he had revealed that he thought they were being watched and had given her protection. Tonks brought out the ward stone and rolled it in her palm. It was still powered up, even though she didn't think she needed it. He had been so intense when she had denied she needed it at the time, so serious. It made her realize just how rare it was for him to be so. It was odd. It was like everything was normally just one huge joke to him, as if he were floating just above the rest of them and disconnected from the concerns of everyone else, apart from when he was with her. She had denied that she needed it, indignant that he thought that she was incompetent, and then his mood had flipped entirely. It had been both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. She still remembered the sudden thrill of terror that had gone through her, the static in the air rising the hairs on her arms. He was a dominating presence, like a storm in a bottle. "I don't want you getting hurt, Tonks." His eyes had been so serious that she couldn't help but believe that he seriously meant it. The wordplay about it being backup and not help hadn't swung her decision in the slightest, but his eyes had. And then she had kissed him. Tonks pocketed the ward stone and buried her face in her hands. She had kissed him, and it had only been their second date. Some would call it the first. What must he think of her? He probably thought she was easy. She just hadn't been able to help it. He'd given her that peck on the lips as a joke, and she had completely melted. He had looked so good in the lamplight, so carefree and, yes, handsome, that she hadn't been able to stop herself. "You were drunk," she consoled herself, "and he kissed you first." Tonks groaned. She didn't need this right now. Things were heating up both in the Auror office and in the Order. The dirty underbelly of magical Britain was getting restless. Dung had reported sightings of Death Eaters making deals with known smugglers and mercenaries in Nocturne Alley, and Snape's reports were just as damning. She didn't need any more trouble right now, no matter how good-looking the trouble was. Something was coming, something big. As if summoned, the voice of someone she despised sounded from the entry to her stall. "Auror Tonks." She grudgingly swung her swivel chair around to look at the tall, stocky man. "Griffiths! What a pleasure," she acknowledged sweetly, foregoing the official title he so loved to enforce. His eye twitched, but he didn't make a retort. "You are called to back up an Auror at the Hinkapunk Quotes hideout now." Tonks frowned. "And who am I going with?" She missed the gleam in his eye. "No partner is needed. You shall meet up with Auror Savage at the scene. Owners kicking up a fuss about some food stores that were stolen." Tonks' frown deepened even as she stood. "That's not proper procedure. Are you sure that?" "You either do it, or you get put out on your arse for defying the orders of your senior Auror, get it? We would all be pleased to see you go," Griffiths sneered. "Just do your job, Auror. I don't want to hear anything about you complaining when you get back." And with that he turned and left, confident she would carry out his orders. Tonks sighed and shouldered on her red cloak. This was a regular occurrence in the office. Even under Madame Bones, the lower-level Aurors could still be negligent and get away with it if they had the backing of Fudge, although some had got knocked down a few pegs after the collective prayers of the masses were answered and umbrage disappeared. Unfortunately, however, the threat of her getting sacked was still a legitimate one. She strode out of the office and walked to the apparition point, cursing Griffiths and his ilk the whole way. She apparated away and landed at the Diagon Alley apparition point, continuing her brisk walk, determined to get into the action. She hadn't been allowed to patrol Hogsmeade, where she had wanted to be, and it was severely ticking her off. She had a feeling that something was going to happen soon, And as Hogsmeade was a pre-planned event, it was a good opportunity as any for anyone looking to cause trouble. The Order had agreed with her. She took a left into Nocturne Alley and marched the few paces it took to get to the hideout, the very few people still in the alley scattering before her quite obvious state of annoyance and flame-red hair. Still irritated, she barged straight into the restaurant, not paying attention as there had been no indication of any threat. The crime had already been committed. It was just a domestic dispute. When she entered, however, she paused. People were inside, all eating, but something in the air was off. Still glancing around, she drew her wand from her holster and took a tentative step into the room. Deciding that it was just because of her bright red aura robes among the shifty crowd, she continued down the cleared path down the center of the dirty black and white patterned tiles of the grimy restaurant, the heel of her boots clicking on the floor on her way. Still, nobody looked up to her or acknowledged her presence as they ate their food. "Oi," she called to the acne-ridden teenager behind the bar at the back of the room. "Where's my partner?" It was only when she got closer that she saw his wide eyes and the two knives driven through his hands pinning him to the desk behind a display showing the different beers on offer. His mouth also seemed to have been stapled shut, and none too gently. Blood was flowing from his lips, and some had ripped out, probably under the stress of his hyperventilation. "Shit," she swore, instantly backing away and drawing her wand, her other hand flying to her comm stone in her ear. "This is Order Tonks, requiring backup at the Hinkapunk Quotes hideout in Nocturne Alley." She quickly summoned the two knives from his hands and stunned the teen to prevent the pain, the bloody knives sent sliding into the corner when she had done so. Behind her, she could hear the sound of the shutters raise over the windows and the door, the paranoia of Nocturne Alley being used against her. At the same time, the hum of anti-apparition wards rung against her senses. Not good. Not good at all. "Why the fuck is nobody answering?" Nobody had returned the message from the commstone. Shit, 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 shit. This was a trap, one that Griffiths had just sent into. How could she have been so stupid? She knew he was dirty, but for him to go as far as directly facilitating her murder. "Hominem revelio," she muttered under her breath while she backed away to get a vantage point over the whole room. The charm washed over the room and revealed 4 white blobs beginning to move towards the entrance to the main room of the restaurant from the back rooms. Even with all of the commotion, nobody in the room had stopped mechanically eating their food. A shiver went over her at the unnaturalness. It was like she was invisible. Taking aim, Tonks let loose a silent blasting hex through the wall at one of the blobs and was rewarded by a startled shout as the hex traveled through the thin wall and sent whoever was there flying across the room. Tonks moved her aim to the next, but before she could fire, everyone in the room suddenly rose at the same time, blocking her view of the doorway. Tonks cursed colorfully and backed up further until she was against the wall, her wand moving across the room for any sign of attack. Through the crowd of people, she saw a row of 3 black-robed figures with white masks move into the room. She didn't even have time to cry out before there was a flash of bright, awful green in the area where the teen had been. She tried not to think about the fact that she had stunned him and left him there, helpless. "Death Eaters." "Nymphadora Tonks," a smooth, cultured voice called from the front of the room. "It would be easier to just hand yourself over now. You have no way out, and we far outnumber you." Tonks had always found it odd as a girl when her dad had taken her to see Muggle movies as a girl, and the baddies had always gone off on long speeches revealing all of their plans and gloating, giving the good guy the chance to escape and capitalize on the convenient information they had freely doled out. She had thought it illogical and fanciful. That was until she became an Auror. It turned out people did it in real life too, against all logic. "Such a shame that your Auror partner didn't make an appearance," the mystery asshole said condescendingly. "I'm sure that perhaps if we're actually any good as an Auror, perhaps they wouldn't have disposed of you without a complaint." If Tonks ever got out of here, she was going to rip both Savage and Griffiths limb from limb. While the idiots monologue, and trust me they will monologue, find a way to kick their arse while they aren't paying attention. The memory of Alistair Moody growled in her head. Oddly enough, the memory of a man who had infuriated her more times than she could count calmed her somewhat. "Don't call me Nymphadora," she grumbled low enough so they wouldn't hear and give her away. With an upwards flick of her Rowan and Ijarak heartstring wand, all of the tables and chairs were lifted upwards, blocking a few curses aimed her way when they saw she was moving. Next, she used a wide-area banisher, hoping that one would manage to hit one of the Death Eaters. It probably wouldn't, but at least it knocked out most of the Imperiused crowd so she could focus on her enemy better. She managed a single blasting curse at the ceiling above them before she had to dodge one curse and shielded the other two. Luckily for her, whoever she had hit had been knocked out and not revived, so at least she didn't have to deal with a fourth. The blasting curse only affected one of them, the big brute on the side that was slow to draw. Tonks hoped it was a crab or preferably a goyle. Not many had the build of a troll. He didn't quite have the speed to bring up a shield to block it and was hit by bits of debris. Amusingly, he seemed to forget he was a wizard and shielded himself with his arms. It was enough for her to drop the shield, dodge an angrily yelled Crucio from one on the far left, and drop the wizard with a stunner powerful enough to send him crashing into the wall behind him to slump stiffly to the floor. Tonks wouldn't mind if the stunner was powerful enough to stop his lungs from moving as well. She had to use her powers to contort her body fast enough to dodge to the side of the first curse thrown at her, but the second one still hit. She hissed and fell to one knee briefly, as the skin bubbled and broke all across her leg, pale brown pus spraying across the worn floorboards of the restaurant even as more curses splashed across her shield. She applied a stasis spell to it, not having the time or attention to find the counter curse to it. She had to spend a fair bit of power banishing everything around her away again, as people had begun to stand once more and draw wands. She wasn't exactly sure who was controlling them, but she imagined they couldn't possibly be in the fight. It took far too much attention to hold so many. Not many had mastery over the Imperius strong enough for something like this. Ducking another Crucio and doing her best to ignore the flutter of her heart at the sight of the dreaded curse, she moved and sent two high-powered blasting curses at the counter in front of them, and summoned the bottles behind them to leap off the shelves and shatter against their heads. The one on the right managed to shield from the blasting curse and narrowly miss a bottle purely through luck, but the other got hit by a bottle behind his shield, sending his cutting curse awry. It was the only reason it hit her. She had dodged where she predicted it wouldn't go, the enclosed space meaning she had to rely on prediction instead of speed. Of course, that meant she moved right into it. It sliced open the meat just under her ribs, and she cried out in pain, spinning with the momentum of the spell. The next curse also hit as she was turned away and in pain, and suddenly all of the air was taken from her lungs and she couldn't breathe. Moody would do this all the time to teach them not to panic. She could be sitting at her desk, and she would suddenly not be able to breathe. The first time he had done it, she had caused so much property damage that they couldn't repair the office with charms. But this was different. Her leg hurt, her side hurt, and she was in a fighting situation with no backup and no escape. Desperately, she banished away everything around her towards where she could see the indistinct blob of black through eyes blurred with tears. Unfortunately, this included a few innocents. She thought she had him when she blinked away the tears and saw everything coming upon him. He hadn't even raised a shield. But then, completely catching her off guard, he apparated. Keyed into the wards. Shit. She rose a shield, but it didn't stop what came. Crucio, he hissed, hate gleaming in the holes of his mask. Tonks would remember that mask forever. It was a cruel, chipped skull with horns coming from the top and curling around to the cheek. She hated it with every fiber of her being as she watched the bright red curse travel through her golden shield and hit her with all of the force of Moody's bludgeoner. Immediately, pain sliced through her entire being, the sensation of millions of red-hot knives piercing her, everywhere almost breaking her hold on reality instantly, her vision darkening around the edges. Unseen to her through the pain, her body rippled like waves on the ocean, and her hair and eyes flashed a spectrum of bright colors. Tonks was, of course, a metamorph magus. She could manipulate every single part of her body to whatever she had in mind. This meant that she was constantly subconsciously aware of every part of herself far more than mages were, so when she was hit by something that afflicted pain everywhere in one's body, specifically manipulating the mental connection to the nerves, it was bad. Already, Tonks could feel her mind slipping, her thoughts dulling, and it had probably only been a few seconds. It could have been an eternity for all she knew. Eventually, though, it lifted, and Tonks realized that at some point she had fallen to the ground. Her whole body was shifting uncontrollably, her control lost in the haze of her pain as she twitched uncontrollably on the floor. "You fucking bitch," the voice hissed above her, one arm clutched to a deep cut in his bicep, not that Tonks could see that through the blood flowing over her vision from behind her eyes. "You stupid fucking bitch." He didn't say anything else. Instead, he grabbed her. Distantly, she felt the pull of a portkey, and then she was away. Oh, ew. 5 minutes earlier, back at Hogsmeade. Harry shook his head and continued walking. Tonks was a big girl. She could take care of herself for a time while he dealt with this problem. She was an Auror with combat training. The kids in this village weren't so lucky. He ignored the pang deep in his heart at the thought of leaving her to be attacked, but it was the lesser of two evils in his mind. He emerged onto the main road and looked around, immediately spotting a Death Eater sprinting from an alley chasing after a child who he recognized as either Padma or Pavarti Patil. Her dress was torn, and Harry could see the man's belt was loose as well. Not even hesitating, he rose his wand and cast a powerful severing curse. Suddenly, nearly headless Nick had a companion to commiserate with. "Get into the hogshead," he barked at the girl, who was staring at the head rolling after her in horror even as he pushed her behind him to continue. He didn't bother to look back to see if she did so. She could hear her "yes, sir," and the wet slaps of quick steps in the mud as she ran in the general direction. He glanced down at his opponent as he walked towards another group he could see in the distance. He was wearing a balaclava with a green coat. It seemed Aberforth's assessment had been correct. Riddle was being cautious. He imagined it was more for the benefit of the ministry than the populace. The public wasn't dumb enough to not connect the dots if they saw Death Eaters casting spells at children in public. As he advanced on the group, he animated a broken window to take the form of a wolf, the broken shards and smaller pieces rising from the mud and silt to form a formidable canine with dully glowing red eyes. He sent it skulking around to go behind the houses to his right as he got closer, close enough to see who was fighting who. 5 men were casting curses at a small, huddled group of some of his 6th years. 3 Ravenclaws and a Slytherin were holding up their shields desperately, a trio of younger Hufflepuffs cowering behind them. Harry could already see the shields beginning to flicker. He was glad that apparently these were some of the less morally corrupt Death Eaters. He let loose with a flame whip, dispatching 2 of them with one swoop, halved bodies sliding to the floor. The other 3 immediately spun to face him, and Harry could see the students behind collapsing from the relief of not having to hold it anymore. "Slate," one spat, "the Dark Lord will be pleased that I—" He was cut off by the blasting curse that hit his shield, the force of it spraying up the dirt in front of him and his partners. Harry's face remained blank as he lowered his wand and waited. The dust settled, revealing the 2 men and the 6th years shepherding away the 3rd years away from the fight. Harry made a mental note to let Drummond off of his detention tomorrow. "What's wrong, Slate, you scared?" one taunted, raising his wand. "Tosser." Harry didn't respond, instead watching as the wolf he had formed earlier sprang from the shadows of the nearby alley and bowled into them, biting and slashing indiscriminately. The sharp glass cut the one on the far right's face to shreds, and he screamed, his hands scrabbling at the sides of the creature, spraying rivulets of more blood from his hands and wrists as he cut himself open on the unyielding creature. Harry took advantage of their distraction and cast a piercer and a bone breaker at the other 2, felling one with a hole in the chest, and the other collapsing to the floor with a broken leg and a cry of pain. Harry walked past them, sending a thin beam of electric blue light through the forehead of the downed man without looking as he continued onwards. Hearing sounds from his right, Harry raced forwards into the small alley that they were coming from. More students were under attack, 3 of them holding off 2 adults in the cramped alley. Harry pointed his wand down at the ground and flicked it forward. A rumble echoed through the ground, and it split apart and raced forward as if something had burrowed down and was forcing its way through. The 2 adults couldn't even react before they were pulled into the earth itself and disappeared with shouts of shock and pain. "You lot okay?" he asked, approaching them. As he got closer, he saw the mass of bushy brown hair and a bright orange one, and where there were two, there were always three. "Yes, sir," younger Harry replied, looking down at the blood seeping from the ground distrustfully. "Thank you." "No worries," Harry said dismissively, then ducked as he felt a swell of magic from behind him. Purely on instinct, his arm shot forwards and caught the yellow curse on the tip of his wand before it could strike younger Harry inches from his face, glasses reflecting the unholy light of the spell. He spun and flung it back at where it had come from. The mage who cast it stumbled to the side, just in time to dodge the organ melter, not having expected his own spell to be sent back at him so fast. Harry fell into a fighting stance and began casting furiously, weaving in transfiguration and charms in between the piercers and blasting hexes. "You see, kids, you always must keep on the offensive once your enemy is on the back foot," he lectured as he scored a painful hit on the man's leg, severing his ankle down to the bone. "If you can dodge without putting yourself in a worse position, always do so. Shields take time and energy to cast, and you cannot return fire if you get stuck behind one," he continued, as he transfigured a large stone that had fallen off a building into a swarm of bees that raced towards his enemy. "As you can see, my enemy is currently on the defensive, but if he does manage to get off a curse..." Harry predicted the curse that came his way, this one designed to send his bottom set of teeth through the roof of his mouth, and batted it away with his offhand while still directing the bees with his wand. "I am prepared for it, and just like that I'm back at an advantage." The now heavily bleeding man once more dodged the curse sloppily, hampered by his mangled ankle leaving him vulnerable to the bees. They swarmed into his mouth and down his throat, stinging the whole time as he screamed and clawed at his face and neck in an attempt to get them off, his wand forgotten. Once he judged enough of them to be inside, Harry let go of the transfiguration, and all of the bees turned back to rock inside the man's body. The sudden increase in size killed him instantly, and he fell to the ground with a much heavier thud than usual for a corpse. He turned back to the three kids, who now all looked pasty and horrified, and smiled. "Now, I want 30 inches of parchment of what you would have done better if you were that unfortunate gentleman over there on my desk by Tuesday, Cappage." They looked at him as if he was entirely insane. Or maybe they didn't know what Cappage meant. They nodded all the same, and Harry smiled wider. "Good. Now you lot go off to the Hogshead and stay safe with the other kids. If you try anything stupid like going back into the fight, I will know, and you will get detention. Off you go now." "Yes, sir," they all said at the same time. Ron and Hermione looked an unhealthy shade of green as they stepped over the heavily bleeding body on their way out, but as he predicted, his younger self only gave it a cursory glance before he moved onwards. He had been a heartless bastard towards his enemies, even as a kid. It took a certain ruthlessness for a 12-year-old to be able to incinerate a man with his bare hands and not even feel a pang of regret afterwards. Harry made sure they were making their way in the general direction of the Hogshead before he headed in the opposite direction, his wand spinning in, between his long fingers in a practiced motion that always calmed his battle nerves. "Get your arse in gear, dickhead. Your girl's in trouble," something snide remarked in his head. Harry reminded it that it was a figment of his imagination and therefore not entitled to an opinion, then hurried up anyway. Any advice is advice worth considering, after all, and he was being a bit of a dickhead. But he trusted Tonks to take care of herself for a while he made sure the students were safe. Moody was a tough fucker. She couldn't have turned out bad. He moved around the fringes of the town, taking care of the odd mage terrorizing running students in a fashion that left no doubt as to whether they would be returning to the fight. Bodies followed his path as he crept disillusioned through the narrow alleys like a shadow, felling every masked individual he saw with a perfectly aimed piercer or blasting curse. Some of them were taken down by his glass wolf, blood now dripping off its clear, jagged edges until someone scored a hit on it with an animation-canceling charm. Harry sent all the glass into the man's stomach in recompense. Every student he saw was sent to the Hogshead so they could flew back to Hogwarts until he was satisfied he had cleared the perimeter. He entered the center of the town with an entrance that nobody missed. It was, after all, fairly hard to ignore the giant golem formed from what had used to be Madame Puddifoot's, purely a coincidence, of course, with half of what had once been a person still held in one beefy hand. It was a crude thing with long legs, a short, burly torso with long arms, and a heavy head with no neck that jutted out forwards. Small, beady black eyes observed the surroundings dispassionately, and it threw the body at a nearby person. It hit the ground and bounced, coming to a rolling stop at the feet of an innocent bystander who had just worked up the courage to come out of his shop and help, probably a Gryffindor. The man looked down in horror at the intestines spilling out of the bottom half of the once beautiful woman and promptly ran back inside to throw up. All of the Hogwarts staff were in a corner of the courtyard, maintaining a large shield that had what looked like all of the students of Hogsmeade that he hadn't sent to Abe cowering behind it. Around it was arrayed the rest of the attacking force, perhaps 10 to 15 of the fuckers surrounding the shield and trying to get in. Harry wasn't prepared to wait for one of them to get the bright idea of using a killing curse. Nobody had used one yet, as he was fairly sure that this was supposed to be a distraction, but he wasn't about to take any chances. The blasting curse to the back of the head of the one nearest to them definitely caught the attention of those who hadn't already somehow not noticed the 9-foot golem looming behind them. "It's Slate," one yelled immediately. All the wands were pointed at Harry, which he thought was totally unfair. His golem moved in front of him to kneel and bring his arm up, blocking all of the curses aimed his way, and he was mildly pleased to see that they were taking him seriously by the vivid green splashes of light illuminating the edges of his improvised shield. Evidently, old Tom was suitably pissed at him. He wouldn't have it any other way. As he crouched behind it, ignoring the loud cracks and hisses striking his construction's shield, Harry began to cast spells, sending one into the ground beneath him and 2 over his head. His golem was eventually destroyed under the onslaught of 5 consecutive blasting curses from the half of the group, still focused on trying to kill him, while the other half stalled the teachers. Cries of triumph rang out as their curses struck his body and slammed him backwards onto the ground. "Peekaboo," he cried gleefully as he appeared next to them. "How nice of them to line up all nice and tidy for me." The cries weren't nearly as triumphant now, as an arc of crackling silver energy burst from Harry's wand and separated 3 sets of legs from 3 bodies before the 4th in the line, dragged up some hastily conjured survival instinct, and twisted to bring up a shield to stop it before it bisected the next 2 of them. Out of the corner of his eye, Harry saw his illusion dissipate where it lay on the ground among the ruins of what had used to be his comrade. He would miss him. They had had such fun crushing skulls together. The shield was all the man got to raise before the ground under him erupted, and he was swallowed whole by a stone shark also formed from behind his golem, revealing the one behind him. Harry batted away the curse the last of his opponents cast with his offhand, again using the trick he had shown Flitwick, towards the back of his next set of enemies. The bright purple and yellow curse pulled some poor sod's brain from his mouth, freeing up Flitwick to help McGonagall, while Dumbledore held off 5 mages at once with apparent ease. Harry reckoned the only reason they weren't already neatly trussed up with a bow tie on their noggin was the man was having to maintain a shield around all of the students behind him at the same time. Harry rolled to the side to avoid the next curse and aimed a powerful summoning charm behind another who had tried to spring a trap on him from the alleyway in front of him, causing all of the cobblestones and other assorted debris to pile-drive into his back before he could dodge it. Harry stunned him and bound him so he could be questioned. He did need to leave at least one person alive, after all. The last 3 all seemed to realize that their situation had taken a turn for the worst. 2 of their number were dead by Harry's wand, and another 2 were bound or stunned by the staff, on top of all of the dead people they didn't know about in the other parts of the village that Harry had taken care of. Harry managed to catch one of them in the back with a bone breaker, severing his spine in 2 as he portkeyed away. Harry amused himself by imagining the faces of the receiving party when one of their number arrived, and then dropped dead immediately. "Harrison," Dumbledore didn't look happy. "What on earth do you think you are doing, in front of the students?" Harry glanced at the shell-shocked faces of the school kids and back to Dumbledore, his face cold. "Look, Albus, I have no fucking time for this. If you think the little shits are going to piss their panties, because a couple heads popped, then you can obliviate them for all I care. Right now, I just need you to do one thing. Harrison. Shut the fuck, you pea, he roared, his wand letting loose a gout of flame before he got a hold of himself. He fought to maintain his composure. His eyes had gained an unholy light, and his hair was moving under an invisible wind. The gravity around him felt stronger, as if his mere presence was pushing everyone below him. Look, Tonks is in trouble. I'm going after her. I need you to put a tracking charm on me, he said firmly, glancing to the right to see the other teachers escorting the kids, whose looks were split between watching the showdown between himself and Albus with interest, looking at him as if he was a serial killer, and looking at the bodies lying around the square in horror. Dumbledore's face morphed from anger and disapproval into a completely blank mask. Harrison, how do you know? I have no fucking time to tell you a fucking bedtime story, Dumbledore. Either you put a tracking charm on me and I go, or you don't and I go anyway. And if she gets hurt or killed because of you, I'll personally come back and turn you into a smear on the ground. Get it? Harry snapped. Dumbledore blinked, looking like someone had been hit with a body bind for a precious few moments. If Harry wasn't so furious, nervous, and admittedly, a bit scared, he imagined he could have laughed, but right now his mind was too focused on the image of Tonks' dead body to even come close to happiness. Eventually, though, he nodded stiffly and applied the tracking charm. Even in his unbalanced state, Harry noticed that he was using a particularly powerful and complex one that probably hadn't been used in a few years. Report to me on Nymphadora's situation, as soon as possible, Harris. That was all Harry heard before he disapparated away with a thunderous crack, his emotions fueling the speed of the apparition instead of the theatrics. He appeared with a similar volume as close to the edge of the apparition point of Diagon Alley, where the ward had been triggered, causing several people around him to jump in shock at the sudden sound. He didn't care. He shouldered his way through the jabbering crowd at a dead run towards what he realized with a twinge of apprehension were the looming shadows of Nocturne Alley. The buildings leant over him, and he felt like they were laughing. His apprehension grew further as he saw a crowd around where the ward had activated. He spied the worn lettering of the Hinkapunks' hideout above a perplexing scene. The crowd was surrounding a warded-off area, inside which was an assortment of random people seated on the floor or laying on stretchers. Harry ignored them, shoving through the crowd to exclaimed protests of annoyance, which he also ignored in favor of breaking through the ward by using occlumency to convince them he wasn't there. Auror barrier wards were one of the few that were visible, a bright red waist-height line. It wasn't made entirely to keep people out magically. It was supposed to be intimidating. He saw the tall, broad-shouldered and pompous form of a man he considered so irrelevant that he barely recalled his name stand and approach him, face splotchy red and furious. You need to get out. This is an active in V. Harry made himself a bit heavier by making his bones denser and shouldered Griffiths aside as if he wasn't there, instead making his way through the doorway and looking into the room. It was a mess. Tables were strewn around the corners of the room in pieces. There were holes in the counter, and the bottles were all smashed. Out, he said firmly to the room, which still had a couple of investigators inside it, including one he recognized as Dawlish. They looked at him oddly, belatedly realizing he was out of place. It wasn't quick enough for him. In a flash of pure, intent-driven magic, all 7 people were bodily thrown from the room, colliding with Griffiths on their way out who had just managed to get up to try and stun him in the back. Brick. Harry set up a temporary protection ward around the doorway, and then, as an afterthought, a silencing ward behind it to block the irritating sounds of the impacting spells against it as they tried to get in. Harry caught a glimpse of Griffith's furious face before he turned to the rest of the room. Tonks was not here, nor were any of her attackers. He tried not to think about what that meant. Muttering varied curses that would have made a goblin blush, Harry moved around the room, looking for any trace of something that could be tracked. There was a piece of chipped white porcelain in one of the corners of the room, the material that Death Eaters used for their masks. There was an arched line in the corner, separating the dust from the unnaturally clean floor. Someone had been using cleaning charms before he interrupted. destroying evidence. He recalled the Aurors hunched over in this very corner. He stood, breathed in, breathed out again, and steadfastly decided that going outside and slaughtering everything wearing red would be far too time-consuming. They had not yet rotated to the area nearest to the door, and there Harry found what he was looking for. He had missed it when he had stormed in and gone straight to the opposite side of the room. There, on the floor, was a pool of still glistening blood. Harry knelt next to it, hard leather boots creaking in protest as the armored knee of his trousers made contact next to the pool. He pressed the tip of his wand into the pool and closed his eyes, picturing the owner in his head as he chanted and pushed his magic into it. He got the feeling of shaping and changing, of constant, giddy excitement and bubblegum pink hair. Blood carried magic, even when outside of the body. This consequently made it extremely useful and simultaneously extremely dangerous if someone with less than honorable intentions got a hold of it, as evidenced by the fetus mort incident. Mages tended to go to great lengths to protect their blood. Satisfied with the result, Harry conjured a crystal vial, siphoned the blood into it, and stoppered it promptly. He cast one more look over his shoulder at a certain fuming Auror and dropped the silencing ward, opening up communications between them. "If I find out you had anything to do with this, you flask of anal seepage, I will personally hunt you down and pull your fucking head off with my bare hands," he said flatly, his gaze unflinching. Griffith still stood strong and angry, but Harry saw the flash of fear. Happy with the reaction, he disapparated with a crack, the sound of the Diagon Alley anti-apparition ward sirens sounding in his absence. He appeared in his study, and without hesitation strode over to a large set of drawers, opening one to pull out a large gray stone bowl from it. He levitated it out, pushed all of the paperwork and clutter off of his desk onto the floor, ignored the sound of smashing glass, and thumped the bowl onto the leather surface of the desk. Inside the bowl there were hundreds of painstakingly etched runes, which all glowed a dark green briefly, when Harry slit his palm open and placed it on the inside of the bowl, channeling his magic into it to activate the seer bowl. Taking out the vial of Tonk's blood, Harry unstopped it and looked at it, his face tight. Slightly disgusted but determined. "Always hated divination," he muttered as he cast a quick cleaning charm over the vial. With one last fortifying breath inwards, he downed the blood, swished it around in his mouth a few times, and spat it back into the bowl, immediately casting a mouthwash charm on himself afterwards to rid himself of the salty tang on his tongue. The runes in the bowl this time glowed a bright purple, and when Harry added the mushed magical pimpernel root and crushed the mixture together with a mortar, it glowed once again with a satisfied sunshine yellow. Harry pressed the tip of his wand into the mixture and closed his eyes once more, much as he had with the blood back at the Hinkapunk. This was not a coincidence. "Unum mecum ease, unum tecum sum, ostend mihi ubi jacet objectum cordis me," Harry muttered the ancient Italian tracking magic under his breath, feeling the tug on his own magic as it took what it required. He summoned up all of his feelings for Tonks to reinforce the power behind his intent, the intent to find Tonks. In his mind, the image of an empty valley between two gently rolling hills materialized. The area it was showing was much larger than he would like. It should have shown her directly, but evidently she was behind some pretty heavy wards. He almost despaired. If he couldn't see her, the magic wouldn't link them. He wouldn't be able to find her. But then he saw the surroundings. He had been here before. "Shit," he muttered, pulling away from the bowl with a heavy frown on his face. He began to twist away, but before he did so checked one more time over himself to make sure that he had everything in place. Looking around, he hitched a fighting knife onto his hip as a precaution before he once more turned away and disappeared away from the room with a sharp crack. "Oh, ew." Silas Bentley trudged down to the edge of the wards, his brows knit together in a heavy frown. Someone had just announced themselves on the edge of the wards, asking to be let in. It was confusing enough that someone would ask, as almost everyone he knew was already keyed in, but the fact that someone not keyed in had managed to find the place was just as befuddling. Nobody should have been able to find the manor. Cautiously, he pressed his wand to the ward to reveal himself to the man. knowing that whoever it was wouldn't be able to hurt him over the ward line. "Yaxley?" he asked in surprise. He knew for a fact that the man was keyed into the wards. He was one of the inner circle, far above him in station. Travers had been friends with the man, he recalled, before he had disappeared. The man looked up, black eyes meeting his own. He had long, straw blonde hair and a narrow nose that were both so common in the Yaxley family. "What are you doing standing outside? Aren't you keyed in?" he asked, his wand drifting to point at Yaxley. "Strengthening ritual," Yaxley grunted, careful hands drifting out of his robes to show that they weren't holding a wand. "Altered my magic, had to adjust my house ring to allow me into my own house. You know how it is." Bentley relaxed a little. It was a valid reason. Many rituals caused wards to reject them once the caster's magic was no longer recognized. But it was also a suspiciously convenient one. Sila's was raised in Slytherin. He wasn't about to just believe something up front. He had also been raised in the magical world. He wasn't about to just believe that what he saw was real. "Forgive me, Corbin, but would you acquiesce to a few revealing charms? We can never be too careful these days. Only a mere month ago we lost Travers." He gestured around him at the expansive grounds, never taking his wand and eyes off of Yaxley. "Although at least we got the house." Yaxley smiled thinly. "I'm sure I can endure it." For the next 5 minutes, Silas ran every charm he could remember the Dark Lord teaching them over the man. There was a Polyjuice detection charm, a glamour-revealing charm, and even one to reveal self-transfiguration. Once all of them failed, he resorted to one last one that Snape had invented to detect Muggle makeup, which also failed. Yaxley proffered his arm and drew up the left sleeve, revealing the dark mark twisting on his wrist. His eyebrow rose. "Happy?" His dark eyes darted to the manor behind him. "I heard you have a metamorph up there. I've always wanted to have a go on one of those creatures," he sneered. "Especially that bitch. She's caused far too much trouble in the Auror office to not be damaged." Silas grinned. He had been thinking the same. The woman hadn't been awakened when he had left to go to the intrusion, but he was looking forward to when she did. He hoped the others would give him a turn before she was disposed of. She certainly was attractive. He was almost angry at Flint for damaging her so badly that she had to be healed to wake up, but only almost. "I wholeheartedly agree," he said, proffering his arm through the wards. "Welcome back to Travers Manor, Corbin. I do hope you enjoy the entertainment." Yaxley grasped him by the forearm as he did in return, and slowly. As if the wards were resisting him, the big blonde man was dragged through, the gesture keying him into the wards because someone else who was also keyed in had done it. Once inside, Yaxley brushed off his black robes and looked around appreciatively before returning his gaze to Sila's. He smiled, and the gesture seemed to strain the face as if it wasn't made for the expression. It was too wide, with too many teeth. "Thank you." Suddenly, the black eyes became a bright, unnatural gray, and the gray was cold and dreadful. Silas went to rise his wand back up, his mind a fog of panic, but the movement pulled on something in his stomach, and he looked down to see a long knife buried into his small intestine, blood already flowing from the wound in a slow, steady stream from the gash. Fuck, is this really happening?" All thoughts of attack were driven from his mind now, his focus entirely focused on the inevitability of his own death and the slow, sharp stab of pain in his gut. Yaxley, or whoever it was, pulled him forward, gray eyes inches from his own, filling his vision with mirrors. "Die in agony, wretch," the man whispered, then twisted the knife, drew it back out and shoved him to the floor, where he cried out in agony and lay twitching, the feeling of blood leaving him and filling up his lungs, driving his mind into a blind panic. Silas Bentley, who had never left any impression on the world apart from misery and a record of attendance, died there on the grass at the hands of the man who had also killed the man who had once owned the grounds he died on. His last thought was it all worth it? Oh, ew. Harry rolled over the dead body of whoever he had just killed and considered the clothing and the face. He conjured a body-length mirror and levitated the corpse alongside it, blood still dripping from the sharp leather shoes of the man. His face shifted and morphed. the feeling of cheekbones and nose cartilage moving and crawling across his face like a horde of spiders, until he resembled the bald man perfectly. With an expansive downward swish of his wand, his clothes also were transfigured into the Black Death Eater robes that were standard among the scum. He felt dirty just wearing them. With one last look over his shoulder at his new twin, Harry drew the cloak together to ward off the September chill and marched off towards the house, occasionally having to shake his left hand to unstick the blood covering it from the inside of the pocket. He paused outside the wards and then knelt on one knee, beginning to chant an anti-magical transport ward to block apparition and portkeys. He didn't want the owner of the wards to apparate away before he could get a hold of them. He wanted to make sure they were taken care of. Apparition and portkeys were one of the easiest pieces of magic to block, a simple ward being enough to block either one, requiring a mage to put roughly double the amount of power that had been put into the ward in the first place to break through due to the exponential efficiency of the ward. Once he felt the familiar hum, he stepped forwards, pushing the heavy dark oak door open with one hand, while his red oak wand twirled slowly in his other. He was coming to love the wand above all his previous ones. It felt solid and reliable, firm and easy to aim. His first wand had been tainted when he learnt why he had got it in the first place, and the elder wand was more of a brutal weapon than a personal wand, not that he hadn't loved that wand as well. He slipped in, shaking his head as he did so. These arrogant idiots were so confident in their wards that they didn't even bother locking doors. His opinion of the Death Eaters lowered further. Compared to the group of terrorists he had been fighting from the magical union of Calmer 3 years ago, these guys were truly idiots, a product of a conceited upbringing with no practice defending against actual threats. This was a product of Dumbledore's reactive nature in wartime. "Silas, who was at the wards?" A gruff voice called from a side room as he walked down the passage a few steps. He had the composition of a bear and was midway through polishing his wand. "Silas, well, I guess that's me." Harry cocked his head at the heavyset man. Traverse Memories dubbed him as Lance McLagan, a low-level Death Eater that Harry had no memory of. "It was Harrison Slate," he said plainly. His eyes could only widen before he was cut down by a vicious slash of the wand that opened him up ear to hip, an ugly sight. The resulting scream and the sound of him being banished into a mirror on the side of the room probably could have woken up the whole manor had anyone been sleeping. Instead, it most likely just made everyone aware that something was wrong. Had he been aiming for stealth, he would have been dismayed by this. Unfortunately for everyone trapped inside the manor with him, Harry was extremely, unequivocally pissed, and his current intentions had nothing to do with subtlety. "What the fuck is going on?" Oh, a woman came stomping out of a room further down the hall, then froze at the sight of the recognizable man covered in blood and the torn-apart body on the floor. She was clutching at her chest with her forearm, which was the only thing keeping the bra on. Obviously, he had interrupted something. Silas. It was all the hesitation he needed. His features melted back into his own along with his clothes as he moved, the man being too short and fat for his own taste and balance. A table to the side of the room was banished at her, trapping her between the door frame and the table. It was followed up by a piercing hex through the heart, her wand arm still trapped. She slumped forwards onto the table, and then was promptly animated to strangle the man who had been scrambling away behind her, the both of them falling to the ground. Harry didn't even look as his steel spear exploded from his wand and nailed the two of them to the floor. 2 more moved out of another room further down, both of their wands drawn and aimed at him. The sounds of their friends dying had finally allowed them to pull their heads out of their collective behinds, it seemed. The first spell was deflected into the wall next to him, and the next whizzed by his nose as he spun to avoid it like a rugby player dodging a tackle. His wand was brought forward and moved, pointing at one wall then the next, then drawn down in a sharp downward motion. The walls on either side of the two suddenly clapped together with an almighty crash, causing the roof above it to sag and fall also, leaving a hole in the roof into the corridor above. Blood began to leak from under the rubble, but Harry ignored it in favor of applying a weightlessness charm to himself and jumping up through the hole, canceling it when he was level with the floor so he didn't collide with the ceiling. Homnum Revilio, he incanted in his head, revealing 3 blobs moving down the corridor behind the rubble, a couple more further down the house, and a small mass surrounding a blob that wasn't moving in a place that Harry remembered as being the location of the dungeons. His heart quickened. He knew what happened in those dungeons. He needed to be faster. Applying a one-way window charm to the floor, Harry watched as the 3 moved slowly down the corridor, eyeing the door to the kitchen that would circumnavigate the pile intently. Wrong way, fuckos. The floor was blasted away in front of him, the rubble catching the man in the back full in the face. The next, a fat man who had no business wearing combat robes, was cut down in the confusion by a fire whip. The last actually managed a spell, but it sailed over his head in the confusion, the only injury it inflicting being the sting of plaster against the bare skin of his neck. They were then roasted alive by a plume of conjured fire and left to burn on the floor. Harry dropped down to the next floor and rolled, cool marble, contrasting with the heat, from the still burning and screaming man to the left of him. He walked past, uncaring. His wrath was an almost physical thing, a terrible presence in the air that quaked knees and clouded minds with dread. In his tattered black robes, seraphic features gilding his face, he appeared a vengeful angel, one of Lucifer's progeny. The next he encountered in a slightly more awkward situation. He wrenched open a door into a room that he knew would eventually lead to the stairs to the dungeons, only to find a man blinking stupidly back at him, his hand outstretched to reach for the doorknob, his wand held in the other. Harry moved first. The 10-inch blade of the knife found its home inside the skull of the young Death Eater through the roof of his mouth. He was fairly sure had been a 7th-year Ravenclaw last year. A shame. He felt the impact of a spell hit the dead body and pushed it forward, rolling to avoid another. This place seemed like it was some kind of smoking room, evidenced by the heavily scented clouds hanging in the air. The haze revealed another in the corner, holding their wand in a 2-handed death grip. "Hello," Harry said cheerfully, pearly white teeth shining through the shining crimson coating his face, the salty tang of blood on his tongue. "My name's Harrison." He didn't ask what their name was. They wouldn't have replied anyway, too busy with the knife in their chest. Harry ripped off a chair leg, transfigured it into a trident and banished it into their neck, the fork the only thing holding up the limp body. Harry hissed as a piercing hex hit his jacket, feeling it partially go through the basilisk hide and burn his flesh with the heat of the dissipated magical energy. "I only just got that fucking repaired, asshole. Do you have any idea how much basilisk hide costs?" he demanded of the unseen source. The next spell was much uglier than the first, uglier in the sense that it was unforgivable. "Okay, if that's how you want to play it." Harry summoned a chair cushion in the way of the killing curse and transfigured the explosion of feathers into needles before banishing it in the general direction of where he thought the spell had come from. A bright white shield shimmered into existence from in front of a dark green door in the other corner of the room. So Harry returned the favor with a killing curse of his own, murmuring the incantation under his breath so he wouldn't be warned. There was no sound, no blood, no flashy explosion of gore or bright lights. There was only the muffled thump of a body falling to the hardwood flooring. Harry stopped in his tracks, shocked at his actions. The thought had entered his mind that he was under heavy wards and no longer detectable, and that was all his mind needed to justify the use of the killing curse for the first time since he had come here. He closed his eyes, the feeling of black magic sending a pleasuring thrill through him before he suppressed it. That was slightly concerning. He moved to the door, a negligent flick of his wand sending the glassy-eyed man skidding across the floor so he could open the door. Halfway through what seemed to be a sitting room leading to the stairs, Harry had to dart to the side to avoid a spell that came from the suddenly open door. He batted away the next spell, almost hitting the target. "I'm starting to get really fucking sick of people getting in my way." He slid under the next spell on his knees like a football player, celebrating a goal, then snapped back up to his feet again, using the sofa he had slid by as leverage. Now within arm's reach of the wizard, he used his abilities, causing the skin on his knuckles to peel back, revealing the bone beneath. The bone rose outwards and melded together, leaving behind a chunk of hard material with 4 pyramid-shaped studs in it, built-in knuckle dusters. Even as these changes came about, his fist was coming around in a brutal left hook, the swing further powered by his abilities, which contracted the muscles in his shoulder faster than usual, resulting in a brutal, dull thud of bone against skin, and bone, as his makeshift knuckle dusters split the Death Eater's cheek open, sending him flying to the left with a heavy cry. His skull cracked against the mantel of a black marble fireplace, and he fell still, his mouth slack. Harry cast a glance his way and slit his throat with a severing charm for good measure, just in case. Flexing his fingers, Harry watched with careful attention as the bones separated and retreated into his hand. Once finished, he summoned the knife from the other side of the room wandlessly, the soft hiss of blade against bone sounding briefly against its holder's ribs. Harry examined it, wiped it clean, then held it carefully in his offhand with his wand in the other. Wands were, mostly, better at medium range and in some instances long. Things tended to get awkward at closer range, which is why Harry preferred to bring a knife along when he knew that the situation required it, such as this one. Even though mages lived with magic their whole lives and disparaged muggle fighting when things got ugly, up close and personal they were human in the end and reverted to base instinct. Let it be said that bringing fists to a knife fight was never a good idea. Before he opened the door, Harry cast one more Homnum Revelio. More blobs appeared on his floor, and the same group was still huddled on the next floor down. One of them was moving towards him from that area. Harry grinned, wand and knife rotating around his fingers in a spiraling, hypnotic pattern in synchronization. "Oh, you lot are so fucked." He kicked down the door, and once more the bell tolled. "Oh, ew." Tonks came to life with a shuddered breath, the feeling of her lungs rubbing against the flesh in her chest making her gasp. Every movement hurt, every contact felt like she was being held under the curse once more. Even her tongue hurt in her mouth against her aching teeth. Her hair was suddenly pulled backwards, and Tonks couldn't help the strangled yell of pain that emanated from her lips. Above her was a thin-faced man with a ridiculous-looking goatee on his chin and a pencil mustache. "Welcome back, bitch," the man said, his voice smooth and soft. "You know, by now you should be coming to the realization that you really, really fucked up," he said calmly. Tonks responded by jerking her head forward and headbutting him, the excruciating pain that blossomed from the contact completely worth it to her. "Eat a dick, you spineless little worm," she hissed, her throat spasming at the use of the words, her voice raspy. Her head was slammed roughly forwards as he clutched his nose, blood leaking from his nostrils freely. His hand pulled away and he examined the blood curiously, a throaty chuckle escaping him. My, he said, closing one nostril with a finger and forcing out a clump of blood as he walked around to crouch in front of her, his dark eyes regarding her in amusement. "Spirited one, aren't you? I don't think you would be if only you knew where you were, but at least it will make you a bit more fun to break." He reached out and traced the length of Tonks' jaw with the back of his unblooded hand. Tonks pulled away jerkily, and without warning, he backhanded her roughly. Again, she cried out in pain, the force of the blow amplified to the point of torture due to the after-effects of the unforgivable. The man continued as if he hadn't just done what he had done, a serene smile still on his ferret-like face. "Do you know what these cells were originally used for, girl?" He gestured around the room, which indeed resembled a prison cell more than an actual room. Multiple people were arrayed around the edges, leaning against the walls. All were watching the interaction with either interest, blankness, or open lust. Tonks looked away. Tonks drew up all of her courage and spat in his face, her eyes having gone completely black with no white and her hair a bright, angry red. "I don't give a fuck where you and your boyfriends bugger each off." That was as far as she got before she was backhanded again, and he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "This, Nymphadora Tonks, was once the domain of Kohan Travers." He watched her face carefully, now hunched over her lap on a limp neck. When he saw the widening of her eyes, he smiled, and it was sharp. "I see you understand what that means." His fingers began to trace down her neck as he licked her saliva off his cheek, and no matter how much she tried, how much she shifted manically in the seat, she couldn't stop him from cupping her breast and squeezing it. Tonks would have thrown up, but but she hadn't eaten lunch the day before, so all that came into her mouth was the sour taste of bile. "So here's what is going to happen to you, Nymphadora Tonks," the man said, his other hand running up the inside of her thigh under the aura robes she was still wearing. "Me and my friends here are going to use you as we wish until you break, and then we are going to dump you outside of Hogwarts for your boyfriend to find." His hand cupped roughly between her legs, but Tonks felt no pleasure, only dread. "Harrison, please," she begged, casting her eyes at the ceiling, as if taking her eyes away from where his hands were would somehow stop what was happening. She was still in far too much pain to control her abilities, or she would have perhaps retracted certain elements of himself to stop it. But she couldn't. She was in too much pain. She couldn't. She closed her eyes, not listening to the words the man was saying anymore, the cruel words fading to background noise as she fell into memory. "I suppose it's your turn to rescue the damsel in distress anyway, no?" Words of a child. She had been so clueless. She had had no idea at the time how true her words had been, how true his words had been. "Harrison, please." She repeated it like a mantra. He had given her the ward. She had to believe that he would bring help, maybe even Dumbledore. She felt his hand slide under, making contact with bare skin and rubbing against the bottom of her bra. "Slate should never have opposed the Dark Lord, but I suppose that it doesn't matter now. Can you hurry this along, Rockwell? I have places to be." An irritated-sounding female voice snapped from the corner of the room. Tonks rolled her eyes upwards to see an aristocratic-looking woman leaning against a table in the corner, a cigarette held in a delicate white-gloved hand. She was wearing an ankle-length dress with multiple layers of smooth baby blue fabric in steadily lighter shades, entirely out of place among the dingy stones and brutes. "Just do what you need to do and get the poor girl out of here already. I barely tolerated these things when my husband was living. Now I just find it offensive," she said disgustedly, making a shooing gesture with one hand while she took a drag with a cigarette with another. Tonks silently praised the woman when the hands were drawn away from her, and the man turned to glare at the woman. "Lady Travers, need I remind you that the only reason the Dark Lord allows you to remain is that you control the wards," he snapped, sounding resentful. "No, let him continue," Tonks gasped out, forcing a mocking grin onto a face that only wanted to scream. "This is probably the first time he's touched a woman in years." The man growled and went to reply with another raised fist, but was distracted by Lady Travers suddenly stiffening and pushing up from the desk she had been leaning upon, a contrite look on her face. "What's wrong with you?" a man asked from the left side of her impatiently. Around the room, people drew their wands as well. Tonks remained still and observed, glad for the distraction. "The wards," the woman said, her eyes closing as she concentrated. "Someone new just got allowed into the scheme." There was a brief pause before the Rockwell glanced to the side at a balding man who looked more like an accountant than a Death Eater. "Who did we send to answer the announcement?" Silas Bentley, that is," the accountant said, his eyes and hands twitchy. Tonks recognized the name. He was from a moderately rich family, not on the Wisengamot, but with more money than lots of the families that were. They had always expected Silas, the second son, of being a Death Eater, but they had never been able to prove it, especially with the ministry's current policy of denial. There was another pause. Why would Silas let someone new in? A blonde who she could only just see from the corner of her vision said in confusion, "There shouldn't be anyone new." "I'm sure he had a good reason. The Dark Lord taught us how to catch imposters, and it's impossible that Bentley's the traitor." Rockwell seemed to gain confidence in his own words as he spoke. His gaze moved to Lady Travers, who was in the middle of taking out another cigarette. "Do the wards tell you who the new guest is?" She gave him one of the most condescending looks Tonks had ever seen, like he was an inconvenient piece of dirt on her red-bottomed heels. Tonks memorized the expression for future use, if she ever got out of this place. "No, as you should well know, there are no such wards that do such a thing." The mousy man didn't reply, but Tonks thought she heard him mutter "bitch" under his breath. "Robertson, go out there and meet with Silas to make sure the idiot didn't cock up the charms." He turned to her once more, a leer on his face. "I'll stay here and take care of the prisoner." The blonde man grunted his assent. catching his wand from a holster before opening the heavy iron cell door with a clang and exiting into the dark passageway beyond. The sound of his footsteps echoing off the cold stone, the only thing left behind in his absence. "Right now, before we begin with the more pleasurable side of things," Rockwell said, dark eyes glinting in the gloom. "The Dark Lord wants to know one thing and one thing only." He leaned in, this time far enough away that Tonks couldn't headbutt him, much to her displeasure. "Who is Harrison Adrastus Slate?" "I have no idea who you're talking about." He backhanded her again, this time causing a lump of bloodied flesh to leave her mouth. "Don't be stupid, girl. We saw you together, you're close. Now tell me what you know about Harrison Slate." "Merlin Harrison, you have pissed off the wrong people." She shrugged as best she could with her hands tied behind her back. "Tall, dark hair, handsome, funny, enough to make a runt like you develop an inferiority complex." "She's stalling," the woman said over the sound of the second backhand, drawing out the words into an almost sing-song tone. She retrieved something from behind her and threw it underhand at Rockwell, who caught it. "Ask her what this is. Some of the runes are familiar, but one face had a cluster that I don't recognize." Rockwell turned over the familiar obsidian cube, hissing in pain when he touched it with his left hand. He dropped it then, his right hand clutching at the underside of his forearm as he cussed fiercely. "The fucking thing bit me." Lady Travers stepped forward and plucked the cube off the floor, turning it in her gloved hands while analyzing the two glowing faces of the cube intensely. "Fascinating," she murmured, casting a glance at Tonks. "It seems to be some way to identify the dark mark end." She turned it over to the opposite face, also glowing a dark red. Her arm dropped, and she scowled at Rockwell, who was still massaging his wrist. "You blithering moron, you brought a tracked ward into the house." She spat, throwing the ward to the ground, where it was destroyed with a blasting curse from her wand. "Can't be tracked here, wards prevent it," Rockwell grunted, rising to his feet. "Yes, but now someone knows that a Death Eater attacked," she snapped, her fists balled into her sides, the cigarette crushed in between the tightly clamped fingers. "Stop crying like a little girl, Travers. You're just being paranoid. We'll take care of the prisoner, and then everything will be fine." He was interrupted by a loud, blood-curdling scream from somewhere in the manor, followed by muffled crashes and more shouts. Tonks felt a glimmer of hope. Had Harrison managed to find her and bring the Aurors? "That's right," she said into the now silent and still room as they all strained for more noise. "That personal ward can break through these paltry protections. I bet anything the whole ministry is coming down on your thick heads right about now." It was all bluster, half hope, half prayer. "Shut the fuck up, you're lying," Rockwell snarled, his wand gripped tight in his hand. Behind him, Lady Travers suddenly turned and blurred in the air before snapping back into reality and stumbling to crash into the table behind her, sending several objects off of the table, including, to Tonks' intense observation, her wand. "Bloody buggering Hades," the woman said, her voice raising in panic from where she sat amid the folds in her dress on the floor. "Someone's put up anti-apparition wards. We don't have port keys either. Didn't think we would need to escape anywhere," the accountant observed as he shuffled away from the door sideways in a manner that he might have considered inconspicuous. "Did you idiots really think you could kidnap an Auror and get away with it?" she taunted as another series of screams and shouts, and the sound of rocks falling sounded in the distance. "You guys are so fucked. They're going to lock you in Azkaban for so long you'll forget your name." She laughed, the action causing pain throughout her chest, but it was worth it for the uncertain shuffling around the room. "Bullshit, Griffiths assured us he would clean up afterwards. You should be more careful who you take orders from, girl," he sneered, then turned back to the lady of the house. "Travers, key us into the ward so we can break the anti-apparition. We can't do it against two sets," Rockwell snapped. "If I get out of this shithole, Griffiths is dead." "I can't," she cried, her voice shaky like her hands. Her chest was rising faster than usual, the first signs of fear breaking through her facade. "Cohen never taught me the chant to add someone into the anti-apparition wards." "Fucking useless bitch," he roared, blasting her across the room in anger where she hit the wall with a startled cry. Tonks couldn't summon up any pity for the woman who had looked so strong and arrogant before now. Rockwell, obviously the leader, took a deep breath before speaking again. You and you, he pointed at two tall men who hadn't spoken until then. Take her to the back of the room and keep a wand trained at her head. We can still get out of here if we use her. Above them, more screams and dull thuds sounded, getting ever closer. The Auror team was getting closer to where she was. Tonks had no idea how they had managed to find her, but she wasn't about to complain. Their room remained silent, listening in dim horror as the screams and shouts got louder, and the sounds of spellfire and bone-breaking could be heard the whole time. You know, she observed candidly, Alistair Moody has always been quite fond of me. I was a student of his, you know. He's probably up there right now, taking care of your buddies. Maybe your daddy's told you, maybe not, but you should know that Mad-Eye Moody doesn't exactly deal with Death Eaters mercifully. Shut the fuck up, one of the brutes on her left said, but she could see they were unsettled. Moody had probably put away or put down a relative of every single person currently in the room. He had become something of a boogeyman for them. It helped that he looked terrifying as well. Dust fell from the ceiling as more muffled shouts and cries of warning sounded above them over the panicked muttering of Lady Travers, who was backed in a corner as far from the door as possible with her wand trained on it. And then there was silence. From the corridor, the sound of someone running manically echoed, a far cry from the calm strides of Robertson. Everyone in the room tensed, their wands aimed at the door. As soon as whoever was outside rounded around the doorway, a volley of spells shot towards the door, all of them lethal. The man, for that, was all Tonks could ascertain before he shot backwards, let off a startled yelp and backed away, barely missing the flesh-rending curse that hit the wall with a fierce sizzle. Wait, guys, it's me, Silas, the man yelled. Silas, what the fuck is going on out there? Rockwell called. The man named Silas came around the door, his hands held up and empty. There were a few indrawn breaths around the room. The man was covered in blood. It was Slate, he's here, the man said, his voice trembling as he came further into the room. You have to help me, he almost killed me. Slate, only Slate, Rockwell asked incredulously, his wand sagging slightly. Silas nodded and glanced at her as he edged around the room in her general direction, past the table. You have to stop him. He got everyone else, he said desperately. Harrison, by himself. Tonks was confused. Surely he couldn't have done this by himself. Sure, she got the impression he was powerful and competent at fighting. He wouldn't have lived through the Burke incident otherwise, but from what she had observed, researched, and been told by him, he seemed to be an average 25-year-old otherwise, not the type to break into a heavily warded manor all by himself and take out multiple opponents. Rockwell turned away dismissively from Silas and faced the door, his wand raised at it. Slate, we know you're out there. Come out and give yourself to the Dark Lord and maybe we'll let the girl go, he called into the hallway. Behind her, Tonks heard a very faint sound of spellfire, and the presence of a wand at her head vanished. She glanced around. Everyone was looking at the door and she was at the back of the room, where Silas Bentley had come. Hello there, Tonksy. Fancy seeing you here. A familiar, light tone whispered into her ear as the vibrations of the ropes being cut from between her hands ran up her arms. Quite the predicament you found yourself in. Tonks tucked her neck to her chest to muffle her words to the rest of her room, her dull brown eyes suddenly gone a swirling purple as her heart leapt in her chest in hope. Harrison, she whispered. Of course it was him. She had somehow completely forgotten that he was a metamorph magus in all of the panic. In the flesh, love. Now it's about time we got moving, don't you think? He whispered back. Streaks of yellow suddenly appeared in her hair when she felt the heart-rendingly familiar feel of her wand press back into her now freed hands. I didn't get myself into shit. This is all your fault, she hissed back with minimal actual anger behind it, too relieved to be truly mad at him. They were after you. She watched with slight amusement as Rockwell cast a Homnum Revelio and got no result. Confusion ensued. You keep telling yourself that, Tonksy. Now I think we should start taking out our opposition, no? I already dropped the two morons that were next to you. You start on the left and I'll start on the right, yeah, he asked, Tonks nodded. Good, now on 3. 1. Tonks shifted the grip on her wand so it would be pointed the right way when she brought it forward. 2. She thought of the first spell and which target. The accountant was closest. She could get him with a stunner, then chain the bodybind for the next, then a blasting curse for the next 2 maybe. 3. She felt him rise behind her to the right so he wouldn't blast her head off when she did the same, her wand coming around to the 4. Luckily, it wasn't as she had worried, and the pain wasn't as bad as it had been earlier. It was still there and still extremely painful, but not so much that she dropped her wand. The accountant dropped to the floor under her stunner, and the redhead next to him fell in a similar manner. Good, 2 for 1. Not that it was hard to aim, what with their backs to her in the smallish room. She was then distracted, however, by the huge swathe of flame that engulfed the right side of the room. Immediately, everyone who wasn't already stunned started either shouting in surprise and pain as their flesh was seared, and for the few who hadn't had flame-repellent charms woven into their robes, their attire was set alight. Harrison, now back in his normal form, followed this up with one of the most brutal attacks she had ever seen. Volley after volley of highly overpowered blasting curses, chained with a curse she recognized as a very illegal dark cutting curse, nicknamed the Bonesaw, tore into the small, now panicked, crowd of 5, turning them into a red mist in seconds. Tonks remembered Moody showing it to her with a rather graphic accounting of how it had taken his leg. He didn't need to do more than 2 of the combos before they were all dead, the screams ringing in the room far too loud for her liking. It was ruthlessly efficient, the art of death in all of its sickly glory. Tonks felt like throwing up. Such was her shock was that she didn't let off her own, much less powerful variant of the blasting curse, and thus she was almost killed by the killing curse that flew towards her, the only thing saving her life being the fact that in his panic, the Death Eater missed, and the fact that even had it been on target, the body that Harrison summoned in its way would have blocked it. The last 2 were then dealt with by Harrison. Tonks' short burst of adrenaline now overpowered once more by the pain of the cruciatus stabbing through every part of her body. She watched with muted horror as he danced around their curses like he had been doing it all his life, shielding both himself and her when needed as he harassed them until he got a shot in. He managed to throw a knife into the foot of the man with the mustache, Rockwell, with his offhand, and used the blood that flowed from it to crawl up from the wound and choke him until a piercer through the stomach downed him. The other saw what happened to his colleague and fell behind a shield in a purely defensive manner, trying to edge their way to flee through the door. All it took was the darkest blue shield breaker Tonks had ever seen for it to shatter along with the man's skull when a bone breaker hit him behind the eyes, and then he was still. She watched from the chair she had slumped back into as Harrison moved into the last person, still moving in the room, Lady Travers. Please, please don't kill me, the woman whimpered as Harrison drew nearer. Harrison, don't, Tonks said, desperate to stop him. She didn't do anything. He looked from Travers to her, his head tilted. The face she had found so mischievous and delicate had an entirely different look now it was smeared and speckled with blood. Now it looked sharp, cruel, and demon-like, a dagger instead of a trick wand. And those eyes, they were one of the most terrifying things she had ever seen at that moment. The color was eerie in and of itself, but what sent a shrill scream through her brain and a beat to skip in her heart was the complete lack of anything resembling remorse or regret for the people he had just massacred. At that moment, Harrison Adrastus Slate was the most terrifying thing Tonks had seen in her life, and despite herself, she was drawn to him just as much as she had been when he had sat calm and innocent underneath the soft yellow candlelight of the 3 broomsticks. He tilted his head at her. I wasn't about to kill her. She isn't bad enough for that, just a bit of an idiot. He aimed his wand at her and stunned her with an almost colorless beam of red light without looking. Now, we need to get you out of here. He came over to her and made to pick her up, and before she could protest that she could walk herself, which she knew she couldn't, his arms were under her knees and behind her back, and he picked her up like she was nothing. He walked past the bodies, levitating the stunned ones behind him as they left to walk back up the stairs. After a moment, Tonks shrank herself to be easier to carry, doing it as slowly as possible as every transformation was still agony, and wrapped her hands around his neck. She would have found the position romantic if it weren't for their current situation. As they moved through the rooms, Tonks became more and more horrified. There were dead bodies littering the rooms, all of them wearing dark robes. More and more kept coming, and it took Tonks several seconds to process that this was all the work of the man holding her. She was an Auror. She had seen bodies, but never had she seen them in such large numbers. You did all of this," she whispered as they passed a man pinned to the wall by a trident through the neck, blood still dripping from his boots to the floor. There were blown-out walls, transfigured objects and curse marks on every wall she could see, and above all else there were bodies. Corpses, some not even recognizable. "MHM," he affirmed nonchalantly as he kicked a desk blocking a doorway, letting the body pinned to it fall to the floor. "They were pretty shit, to be honest. I would hope that my students would do better. Honestly, no semblance of teamwork at all, and exceeds expectations at most." She looked up at him in disbelief. He was making jokes, now. "Are you fucking insane?" she blurted out before she could stop herself, although it didn't seem to faze him as he kept walking. "Harrison, you just killed how many people, and you're making a joke." He frowned. "They deserved it, they took you." She looked away at the grounds they had emerged onto, not wanting to confront the possibility of any truth in those words. "I can walk by myself now," she said, not wanting to be near him. The smell of blood and smoke was too thick around him, as were her conflicting emotions. She was of course thankful for him saving her. She dreaded to think what would have happened had he not, but he had also just massacred a whole house full of people and didn't seem to find that morally wrong. And the worst thing, by far the worst, was that she still wanted to kiss him all the same. "No, you can't. You can't walk. You're still suffering from cruciatus exposure." At the look she gave him, he explained. "I can still feel you shaking in my arms." Tonks didn't reply. On the outside of the wards, they encountered Dumbledore, who rose his wand to them almost before they had even escaped the ward line, only relaxing when he saw who it was. "Harrison, Nymphadora, are either of you hurt?" the old man asked, sounding worried at the amount of blood covering both of them. He gave a sharp look at the blood-covered jacket that Harrison was wearing, but otherwise did not comment. "Not my blood," Harrison said as he levitated the three out of the ward behind him. He nodded at her. "A lot of hers is her own, though. She's got a deep gash on her left side. Cutting curse, I think. Some pretty bad cruciatus exposure and Garden's boils on her leg. You need to take her to Mungo's." Tonks was distantly pleased that he sounded concerned. Dumbledore nodded, and when Harrison put her down on unsteady feet, he gently took her arm, ready to apparate away. Before he did so, he looked at Harrison, who had turned away. "Where are you going?" he asked. "And what do I do with these three?" He gestured to the three unconscious people on the floor. Harrison stopped and looked over his shoulder at the both of them. "Just cleaning up. I'll take care of them later." "Harrison," Tonks said, uncertainty in her tone. She wanted to say it before she left. He rose an eyebrow at her. "Thanks," she said weakly, her reliance on Dumbledore's arm more urgent. He gave a short nod and a grin, then he was through the wards. She and Dumbledore stood there, watching the space where he used to be. "He killed so many," she said, her voice low. "Who is he?" Dumbledore shook his head, his face solemn. "I'm afraid that only he can answer that question, Nymphadora." She didn't say anything more, and neither did he. They just stood there, staring after a man they were beginning to realize they didn't know as well as they had thought, and then they twisted into the air and were away. "Oh, ew." Harry pushed through the door of the hospital, his face drawn into a grimace. He was wearing a suit for the first time in decades. The material felt itchy on his skin. He felt awkward, like a street hound picked off the street and groomed, but he felt it appropriate. Her family would be there, her friends, her colleagues, all people that knew her, personally. He knew he belonged there, he had rescued her after all, but he still couldn't help but feel like he wasn't supposed to intrude. "Harrison Slate, I'm here to see Nymphadora Tonks," he said to the receptionist. She looked like a Melanie to him. The short, rotund woman with the brown bob cut gave him a slightly apprehensive side-eye as she scanned the parchment with a finger. It was a common occurrence now. Nobody knew exactly what had happened when Nymphadora Tonks had disappeared, but what they did know was that he had barged into the scene, blasted away an auror, apparated through the Diagon Alley wards. Then the same woman who had disappeared had come through the doors of St. Mungo's bloody and bruised not long afterwards, and several prominent figures in both the underground and pureblood scene had mysteriously gone missing. Harry spied the Daily Prophet lying on a desk next to her. The picture of Traverse Manor burning to the ground spread large across the front page. They probably could have arrested him for intruding on a crime scene, but they wouldn't be able to make anything else stick. The deaths at Hogsmeade were obvious self-defense, and nobody had seen him enter or leave Traverse Manor apart from Dumbledore, who wasn't about to throw away someone who had just removed a large chunk of his opposition, no matter how many disappointed looks he had sent his way in the past few days. Lady Travers had awoken with the memory of a narrow escape from a terrible house fire, and nothing else. The other two stunned had also mysteriously disappeared after some choice questions were asked. On top of that, the news finally got out about him speaking with Dementors and the magic inhibitor cuffs falling off, and nobody was sure if anyone would be able to arrest him even if they wanted to. It was an odd kind of standoff, like two men who knew the other wanted to murder them, but couldn't quite bring themselves to draw wands because they weren't sure what the other could do. Of course, Miss Tonks is in the Magical Curses ward on the second floor, Ward 10, she said it quickly, as if he would curse her if she didn't tell him fast enough. Harry nodded, then drew his wand and swished it down himself, ostensibly to clean off any detritus on his suit that didn't exist. If the fact that the woman fell off her chair in fright as he walked away warmed his cruel, dead heart just a little, then that was nobody's business. Harry knocked on the door of Ward 10 3 times and waited. Muffled footsteps sounded from beyond the thick white wooden door, and it was opened to reveal another short healer, a man this time, in green robes. He looked up at Harry's much taller form, but this time didn't look fazed. "Harrison Slate, I'm here to see Tonks," he said. "I know who you are," the man replied, not moving. Harry stared at him for a few seconds. "I hope you understand that you standing there isn't going to prevent me from entering." The man, Constance Drought judging by the tag on his left breast, drew himself to his full height, which was still under Harry's chin, and looked ready to give a hot retort, but was denied by a sharp female voice sounding from behind him. "Let him in, it's fine," Andromeda Tonks said as she came into view. She addressed the Medi-Wizard, but was looking over his head at Harry as she said it. The man bristled further. "No more than 2 visitors. I have studied the healing arts far longer than you have, Constance. I can prove it by numbing every single bone in your body as I break them. Would you like to try it?" she asked, her glare turning to the shorter man. "I would listen to her mate. She's got the height advantage as well," Harry said consolingly. The man scowled at both of them, huffed, then turned and left, muttering something incoherent under his breath. Harry stepped into the ward and closed the door behind him with a soft click. He and Andromeda stood studying each other for a few moments. She seemed to be searching him for something with her eyes. "Not exactly how I plan to meet the parents," he offered, the joke falling flat to him even as he said it. She hummed, stared at him a while longer, then took 2 slightly hesitant steps and wrapped him in a hug, the bottom of her nose on his shoulder. She was a tall woman. "Thank you for rescuing my daughter from that horrid place," she sniffed as she drew away, the beginnings of tears welling in her eyes. "I have no idea what I would have done if I had lost her." Harry rose an eyebrow and leaned against the doors, slightly taken aback at the affection. "You don't blame me at all. You know it was because of me she was taken in the first place." She shook her head and wiped away a tear with the back of her hand, a slightly exasperated look coming over her face. "Nymphadora has always been willful. No doubt if I disapproved of you, she would have only chased you further, which is exactly what happened in your case." Harry was beginning to understand how she ended up with Remus. He hummed in a way that indicated nothing, but filled in his answer anyway. "Still, I have to warn you I'm dangerous," he met her eyes. I kill people. People are going to try and kill me because of that. Your daughter could get caught in the crossfire if she chooses to stay with me. She already has. They deserved it, she responded immediately. Another tear was wiped away. What those brutes were about to do to her, no, they deserved it. She drew herself up. I may no longer be a black, and I may despise anything associated with the name, but I was still raised one, and I know what you did was the right thing, just. Her shoulders slumped back down a bit. Just keep her safe, okay? I've come to terms with her being in danger. She's an Auror, but this is all new. She told me about the ward you gave her. Just do more of that, please. She was rambling a bit now. Harry saw the shame that he had been able to protect her daughter where her mother hadn't been able to. Harry was sure that Lily Potter would relate if she could. He gave her a nod. Of course. He looked to the only curtained bed in the room. How is she handling this? Andromeda cast a mournful look over her shoulder. I think it would be best for you to find out for yourself. She refused to talk about you when we brought it up. Harry felt his stomach twist. All right, he said in a tone that sounded suspiciously like a croak. Andromeda gave him a look he couldn't decipher and disappeared through the curtain, soon emerging with a tall, messy-haired wizard with a slight rise to his stomach and lines on his face that spoke of many beers and deep laughs. He was wearing ribbed denim jeans and a biker jacket. Evidently, this is where Tonks had got her style from. This was Ted Tonks, a man Harry had only met once when they had been on the run, by some miracle running into each other in one of the many Old Order safe houses. They had heard the news of his death on Potterwatch 3 days later. Ted shook his hand firmly. Thank you for retrieving my daughter, he said, his face far too serious for the laughing lines. I am of course in your debt, but, he leant forward, if you ever go anywhere near my daughter ever Agai. Edward, Andromeda snapped, pulling away the man by the arm. I don't think that's really your choice, mate, Harry replied coolly, his gaze already falling back onto Andromeda. He bowed his head. It was good to meet you, Mrs. Tonks, Mr. Tonks. He gave the glaring man a short nod and moved away to the curtains, the sound of the door closing behind him and the soft hush of the two conversing the only noise behind him. He opened the curtains and stood, still, watching. Tonks lay in a bed in the center of the area, the prophet spread out on her lap and several cards by her bedside table. It was late in the day. Harrison was probably the last to come and see her. Her parents had been with her the whole time. She looked up at him, her eyes turning from a muddy brown to a gray much like his own before they returned to the same shade of brown. Her hair was also a dull brown with streaks of black in it. Harry couldn't blame her somber mood. What she had gone through was rough. They stared at each other for a while longer, the air between them heavy. A pressure on his ribs seemed to be preventing him from breaking the silence. Eventually, though, he brought up the courage to do so, feeling that breaking his ribs was preferable to letting the silence stretch longer. How are you holding up, Tonks? She smiled at him, but Harry could see it was strained. I suppose I've seen better days. Harry frowned, stepping forward. Will there be a scar? She shook her head. Nope, skin still silky smooth as ever. You sure you don't want me to examine it? He asked. She gave him another smile, but again it was too thin and the words sounded forced. Maybe another time. She paused. Thank you for getting me out of there. Things were really beginning to look nasty. I don't know if I would have been able to escape by myself. Harry waved her off. I'm sure you would have figured something out. Plus, it was your turn to be the damsel in distress, no? For some reason, those words seemed to make her shrink into herself, her abilities making it literal. Her hair darkened further, her face got softer, and she seemed to get smaller by a foot, even as she gave him a weak laugh. Yeah, I suppose so. This was wrong, something was different, and it wasn't him. The conversation was too stilted, the silences between his words and her answers slightly too long. Something seemed to have taken residence in those moments of hesitation, and Harry had a sneaking suspicion of what that could be, although he had never imagined it would be a problem. Her eyes were downcast when he broke the silence again. Do they have any idea how long you'll be cooped up here? She shifted under the sheets, her hair turning as white as the walls. About 3 more days, the Cruciatus, it was much worse for me, because of the Metamorph Magus abilities. She turned a calculating look on him. But I suspect that you would know something about that, wouldn't you? Harry shrugged, ignoring the sensation of his stomach sinking. I've been hit by it more times than I would like. Wasn't exactly a walk in the park, he replied nonchalantly, subconsciously fiddling with the curtain he was standing next to as he watched her body change with rapt attention, filing away each minute change of color and face shape to try and discern what she was feeling. She seemed too plain, too dull to be his Tonks. There, you did it again, she announced, a heavy frown marring her face as she finally met his eyes. You joke about getting hit by an unforgivable like it's some kind of minor inconvenience, and you joked about killing all those people the other day. She shook her head, her voice soft. Who are you? Harry swallowed. The same guy who you sat next to in the ministry. Are you, though? She asked, sitting up in the bed and jabbing a finger at the flailing flames dancing across the face of the newspaper. Because the man I met then wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have killed all of those people. So this is what this is about. Harry scowled, his arms crossing when he realized he had been fiddling. You had no idea what I was then, you. 22, she cut in, her voice hard, mousy brown hair suddenly streaked with thin strands of red. 22, does that number mean anything to you? Harry mulled the number over then shook his head, slightly confused. That's the number of people you killed that day, Harrison. Moody came by with a pensive and we counted. 22 people, and you didn't even seem fazed by it. Harry was very thankful for the silencing ward now. And that's 22 people that won't rise again and try the same shit again, Tonks, he replied hotly. All of those people deserved what they got, Who are you to decide something like that? She cut in again, her fists clenching into the bedsheets as she pushed herself up higher. You can't just go around killing people when you like. Oh, I'm sorry, I suppose I should have just waltzed into the manor and stunned and bound each one. Just so they could be revived by their friends and curse me in the back. Sorry, Tonks, but I wasn't prepared to start using Jellylegs jinxes on them when they were firing killing curses back, he retorted, sarcasm lacing his tone like venom. Just because they use curses like that doesn't mean you have to lower yourself to their level, she said, sounding disgusted. You were throwing around dark magic like it was nothing. What makes you better than them when you do shit like that? Harry stared at her. Are you kidding me? He asked incredulously, stalking towards her bed with purpose, a finger jabbed in her direction. What makes me better than them? All right, let's see. What about the fact that I did it for you? I killed those people to save your sorry arse, and now you want to have some sort of argument about morality. I'm not fucking ungrateful, Tonks spat, moving out of her bed to stand in front of him, her hair a flaming inferno of red and orange to match the pyre that was Traverse Manor, her height adjusting to equal his own. I'm grateful, of course I am, but that does not mean that I'm just going to ignore the fact that you massacred dozens of people. Harry stepped closer, hard gray staring into deep black, repeating, I did what I did for you. And do you have any idea how terrifying that is? She cried, her face flushing red and tears brimming. Do you have any idea how terrifying it is, knowing that someone that anyone would do something like that just for me? Harry stared at her. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving in anger. Various thoughts entered his mind, including how far down that blush went down before he fought such images down and stepped away. And I would do it all again, he rasped, his voice hoarse. I would kill them all again without hesitation, twice their number if necessary, but you're deluding yourself if you think this somehow makes me someone else. I would have done the same before I entered Azkaban. He stared at her, mirrors hardened from reflection to hard silver, flecks of deep gold entering them. He spread his arms. I was always like this, Tonks, this is who I am. She shook her head. No, I refuse to believe that you're a murder. That's not the man I sat with. Oh, get off your fucking moral high ground. We underlings are getting real fucking sick of it, Harry spat, his eyes getting more and more gold as his anger built. For someone who was trained by Alastor Moody, you're being a right coward about this. You know the man held Evan Rosier under the Cruciatus for a full minute before he killed him. That man was a vegetable before he put him out of his misery. That's not relevant. No, it really is relevant, Harry interrupted. Have you never thought it? Thought that maybe, just maybe, if you had used something more permanent than a fucking stunner, he spat. Maybe your friend wouldn't have been killed later on. Maybe that child wouldn't have lost their parents.